Everyone. Great. So yes, I'm Emma DeLong, even though both of our names say you'll see Heidi's name says Emma DeLong also. We share one brain. So that's Heidi. I'm Emma. We're excited to talk to a group of like-minded fiber folks who it's always fun to glean inspiration and hear a little bit about your projects as well. And we thought we'd just share some slides about our process as the Pennsylvania Flax Project within the last 3 years, and a little bit about where we want to go. And please feel free to ask questions throughout. It can be a casual conversation. We'd also love to hear where your interests lie as well. So maybe Heidi, I'm not quite sure how to share. If you're more comfortable with that, you can.
I will try to figure that one out. I don't think it should be that hard. See what happens.
Yay.
Wow, it made my screen look really odd. Can
you see the rest of us? Yeah, I can see it. It's not, if you do the play button. Yeah, perfect.
There we go. Okay. I don't know how to advance slides on this, so this will be really interesting.
Maybe hit the forward arrow.
Or just enter usually works as well.
Okay, well, I'll try enter when that moment comes and we'll see if I succeed. I may need some more coaching. I just was gonna, for a minute, talk about how Emma and I met and how this all began. And I will say here that Emma is the best partner a girl could wish for on a journey like this. We really, the connection has been really great, and we've really just galvanized around something that's getting so much larger than us, faster than we imagined it would. We were introduced through mutual friends because I work with linen and I sew and I design, and Emma was getting married and somebody thought maybe I might make a wedding dress for her, and she came to my home studio and we started talking about that, and we also started talking about doing a natural dye project with indigo that she grows on her farm. And then I started talking about flax for linen and how there was no real source for it in the US and how that should change. And literally within an hour of having met one another in those days, right before the pandemic started, we decided, let's plant 1/8 of an acre of flax for linen at Knee-High Farm and see what happens. And here we are. So
wild ride.
Yes, here we are, doing presentations like this where we're talking about farming flax for stronger communities. So I think you guys probably all know what makes flax a desirable crop for fabrics and what makes linen a desirable textile. But in a nutshell, I do my business, Kitchen Garden Textiles, is designing products that are fabric for use in direct relationship to food. So for food storage and for tabletop. And I really like that linen is stronger when it's wet than when it's dry, that it's more absorbent than cotton and dries faster. And its antibacterial and stain resistant qualities are really, really special and part of what's made it such an enduring fabric for humanity. And then there's just a little bit of history, which is that humans have been cultivating flax for over 30,000 years. In like the earliest known flax fiber, they believe was for rope, was found in the country of Georgia. That's dated at 37,000 years old. So that's pretty incredible to be continuing on a tradition like that. Who doesn't want that, right? And then I love that in Egypt, one of the beliefs is that flax brings good fortune and restores health. And I just love that so much because it's really what Emma and I are hoping to do with this project, to restore planetary health, to restore health in our communities, and to bring good fortune to everybody. Flax, in fact, traveled to the United States with the German settlers in the 17th century who settled Germantown, Pennsylvania, which is basically where I live. So it's also where my parents lived when I was born. So the house I went home to originally was probably a flax farm at some point. So that's pretty cool. And the mid-Atlantic region was a major producer pretty much until the Industrial Revolution and sort of post-World War II, when the industry faded. Well, I don't know if it really faded. It was displaced by synthetic textiles. Just a little factoid, 1 million tons of global flax fiber production in 2020. That photograph is our first crop at Knee-High Farm, a portion of it after laboriously harvesting it by hand. 1/8 of an acre is a lot of flax to pull up. And then Emma, I'll let you take over now about the growing stuff.
Great. Yeah. I see one question from Bernadette that says, would flax grow in zone 7B, which even as a farmer, I need to look up the zone. So I'm seeing that's 0 to 10 degrees is the low temperatures there. Flax is very cold hardy. So if you can grow indigo, Persicaria tinctoria, which is very frost sensitive, you absolutely can grow flax in 7B. It's flax for edible use, for seed and oil. Is mostly grown in North Dakota. So that's where in the United States flax is grown. So you should be fine. And where is it? Texas, Oklahoma, all those places. All right. Any questions about that in the beginning? If you have a question, you can open your microphone right now, and then I'll move a little bit into growing the flax, which I know many of you are probably interested in. So if you have questions, just throw them.
I'm in Frederick County, Maryland, and I've been growing it for 3 years. But this year we planted it earlier in hopes that I could get it to be less coarse. So I think it's starting to come up the first bit, and I've spread a little bit more out just to make sure we have enough. So we'll see.
Yeah. From what? Go on, Heidi.
I was just curious what seed variety you're growing.
Nathalia,
Okay.
which I originally got from Landis Valley Farm gift shop. I split some with a friend, and I've just been saving seed and replanting we planted the taller plant seeds this year. So encourage it to be taller.
Nice. That's the variety that we've had most success with also. So we like that variety. Also from Landis Valley.
One more thing. I noticed that wool gatherers have a source of flax strips.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Found that out.
Nice.
It's on their website.
Thanks.
Great. So Heidi, maybe you can go into the next slide. So flax, yeah, as we said, it's very easy to grow. It has a very high frost tolerance. So I just remember last year we seeded it. Heidi and I have always gotten around to seeding it at my farm like mid-April because the ground is so wet and clay. It takes a while to dry out. But early May, we had a drop in temperature. I think the low was maybe 19 degrees. And, it's just out in the field unprotected, and it was completely fine. So it's a hardy little plant. And it's really fast to mature. So days to maturity from seed to harvest is about 100 days. That can vary within weather conditions. If you have a really dry year, it might finish early. But that's why growers really love it, like in North Dakota, not fiber growers, but for food, because they can get a second crop in afterwards. So first rotation is flax, and then typically like a bean or like a soybean or legume comes afterwards, which makes the acreage more profitable. It has very low to zero fertilization and irrigation requirements. So I mean, large scale crop farms, they're not irrigating their flax. They're mostly dependent on rain and weather. Places like California, like the Chico Flax Project, I'm really curious what they do in terms of irrigation, if they're doing like some kind of overhead water rig. But in our climate where it typically rains throughout the summer, you should be fine. Fertilization, we had the best results when we did not fertilize. And I don't know if that was just from the other conditions in the year, but you know, like any plant, it likes a balanced soil. So if you're growing with a, you know, a generally balanced pH, you're gonna have a healthy bed for anything to grow. So you don't need excess nitrogen or phosphorus or anything for it to really green up and mature. For fiber planting, the seeding is very dense. It's about 140 pounds per acre for fiber. And that's because you want the stalks to be very straight and to grow up. They kind of compete with each other and grow up very straight. So you get a very straight fiber. You really want to avoid the branching out, which you'll see if you grow a patch of flax, you'll see on the edges, it'll branch out because it has more space and room to grow. But then you get a curvier fiber and you get more seed pods rather than just like straight lines. You'd say that, right, Heidi? That's pretty accurate.
That is, and I would say also what you get is longer fibers, because everywhere it branches out is sort of a separate, it's a break in the fiber. And the density, also if you plant denser, you get a finer fiber because the stem is narrower and the fiber is finer.
Mm-hmm. There is a balance because we always broadcast seeded, and there's definitely like just little runts that get shaded out, or so, you know, I wouldn't say go hog wild and do 200 pounds of seed per acre. There's a balance in between. And that is 140 pounds per acre. So how we have calculated it, you know, for smaller plots, the 1/8 of an acre, we've just divided 140 by 8 to see how much to do on that 1/8 of an acre. If you're growing out for seed, then it's about half of that. So it's about, what is it, 60 to 70 pounds per acre, right? Yeah. And that's because you want the branching and you want more seed pods to develop. Flowers emerge. So that first slide you saw was the beautiful blue flax flower. They emerge after about 2 months or 60 days, and they bloom for a glorious 2 weeks before the seed pods start to form. So it's a real treat to see. I mean, especially like an 1/8 of an acre, you see this undulating, incredible blue wave of flowers every day. And, you know, pollinators really benefit from them. We saw little bees buzzing in every flower. And the one thing is they close up at night. So we had this dream of doing like a flax dinner in the field with the flowers all around, and then like sunset hit and all the flowers closed up. We were like, oh, whoops. But during the day, they're incredible.
Maybe a brunch next time.
Yeah. A luncheon. And then, so is it pronounced Janelle? Is that?
Janelle.
Janelle.
Yeah.
So Janelle was saying she was seed selecting for the taller plants. With Natalia or Natalie, we had about 30 inches, which is ideal for the long line fiber. You don't want it too much longer if you're aiming to have it mechanically processed, because the equipment, which we don't have in the United States, but in Europe, the equipment is basically built around a 30-inch high plant. So that's kind of the height you're looking for. If it's had, you know, if there's been a drought or it's been severely stunted in some way, it'll be shorter, but that's kind of the target height you're looking for.
For hand process.
Our tallest ones were over 40 inches.
Wow.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And the medium sized ones were in the 36-ish range.
Mm-hmm.
But I process them myself, and I'm only growing what 7 or 8 square feet of it. So
Great.
Or 7 by 8 or 8 by 9 or something like that. 7 by Yeah, so
Yeah, the longer the better for that.
that's about as much as we can process each year, and I haven't tackled everything from last year.
Mhm.
So I just keep growing it. I'm hoping to improve what I'm doing, and I've got enough to play with.
Fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, for
I
hand
call it my artisan batches.
nice. Yeah, for hand processing, the longer, the taller, the better. If you're looking to scale regionally, which is what we're aiming for, you sort of want what am I trying to say? A consistent 30-inch height across the bed. Anyway.
Yeah. And then when harvest time comes, you're looking for when about a third of the plant has become, from the base up, like from the roots up, has become kind of a golden brown. So if you've seeded now or early April, you're looking around late June, early July is when we've harvested. Yeah, that's correct. Doing some math in my head.
Just wait until it's 100 degrees out and then you go pull it by hand.
Make it fun.
We all like a challenge.
I was gonna say too that
I'm planning to go. I'm planning to aim for 80 days in order to try and get it finer.
I was just gonna say that. I was
Told
gonna
that
say
hot weather is not good for you.
Hmm.
Not good for it. Makes it tougher.
right. I was gonna say that for a finer fiber, actually you harvest well before the seeds are mature. I mean, you harvest before the seeds are mature for fiber anyway, but like people who are growing fine fiber for lace, for instance, they harvest just right after flowering to get a finer fiber. So you don't want the plant to get to full maturity.
How many days would you say that is?
Flowering happens at 60 days. So I'm guessing that if for like lace weight linen, you would be harvesting like probably at about 70 days.
Yeah, I would say that. 2
between
weeks of
70,
bloom.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you're about right. You're thinking 80 days. I would say between 70 and 80 days. Yeah. So I would say if flowering generally lasts a couple weeks, so you would want the flowering to happen, let it happen for a week, and then begin to harvest for the finer fiber.
Heidi, do you know if there's a disadvantage to harvesting too early, like in terms of the fiber not being developed enough?
It's developed enough. You'll get a less, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages, right? You'll get a finer fiber. So you can make a finer cloth, a finer yarn, a finer cloth with that. You'll get less tonnage per acre. So if you're concentrating on tonnage per acre, there's a economic disadvantage. So, but if your interest is in the really super fine linen, you'll just want to harvest a little bit earlier. It'll be shorter. The staple will be shorter because the plant still is growing after flowering. So flowers is pretty short still. And then it I don't know, it shoots up at least another 6 or 8 inches before the traditional harvest time. So I don't know that it's just variation, I think, not necessarily advantage, disadvantage.
Yeah. I mean, we heard about that one lace, that farmer in Ireland who grows for lace, right? Who I think they defoliated all the plants through a chemical. So they're just like one single straight stalk. There's all different ways to do it.
Yeah, so they didn't want the interruption even of where the leaves were. They just wanted this one straight, super fine stalk. And so they just chemically defoliate it and grow it. And they harvest when the buds set. So they're just getting these little super, super fine bits. We don't endorse chemically defoliating your flax, but harvesting early is good.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to get
coarse fiber is harder to spin.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're trying to get another crop in, typically like a fall planted crop will go in early July in our climate, at least. So if you can, rework the soil, harvest and rework the soil in June, you're good to go. So it might be nice to get at a little earlier. That's a nice segue into harvest, because one benefit to fiber growing flax for fibers, it has to be, I mean, a benefit and a con is it has to be pulled in order to keep the integrity of the fiber. So when farmers hear that, they kind of tear out their hair because there's no equipment, there's no scaled equipment for pulling a crop out of the ground in the United States. If you look up, you can look up videos of a flax harvester in, what is it? Is that on, I forget what website it is. You just look up a YouTube video. It's like Flax Harvester in Europe.
It's a French company that has the really great one. I was just watching it last night, actually.
It's very soothing. I mean, it's
I
incredible.
muted myself.
It's massive, and it really, it's like goes 40 miles per hour because
There's this weird.
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So there is equipment available. It's just not, there is no infrastructure equipment here, but that means we all get lots of good exercise pulling our flax crops. And Heidi can attest to that in the heat wave of July, an eighth of an acre. But that's fine, Heidi. If it's, the slide is only, we can all see it at that size too, if it doesn't play. And so then after you've pulled your flax crop, there's another process called retting, which you're probably familiar with, fiber heads. And that's basically just a natural rotting process that back and forth, where for us, we've done a process called dew retting, where you pull the fiber and you lay it back on the ground, and the microorganisms in the soil will break down the pectins, which allows the fiber to be separated from the actual stalk. Right? Yeah. I always forget the fibers are around, or no, they're inside, right? The core, or are they around the stalk? You know this one, Heidi.
They're round the core.
Around the core. I don't know if she can hear me anymore, but can you hear me, Heidi? No. Well, hopefully she gets back on, but oh, Marion, do you have any advice for that? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, can't hear you.
She's now looking up. Heidi. I can type her a message in the chat.
Yeah. Huh. Well, maybe if she needs to unshare her screen, that's fine. We can just keep, I don't know if that would mess with.
Hold on, I can ask her to unmute.
Okay.
Did that work?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I can't hear any of you.
Oh.
And moving on. We lost you for a while, Heidi.
She said she can't hear us though. Oh. I don't know. Do you think we should move forward if she?
Yeah. I don't know why she can't hear though.
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's awkward.
Technical difficulties. Maybe unshare.
Oh wait, that worked.
Does that work? You can hear us?
Yeah. Speak and pause. Do you hear a replay? All right.
You,
I think
you can hear us?
Excellent.
Yay, good job.
I'm back.
She's back.
I apologize for that.
No. These Zoom meetings, always something has to go wrong every time.
I just like accidentally touched something and I'm like, I'm great. Now I don't know what to do. All right.
We focus on fiber, not technology.
Back. Sorry about that.
We were just talking, Heidi, about the retting process and how it's a necessary process after harvesting. There's different ways to do it. We were saying the dew retting where you lay it on the ground versus tank retting, which is an option, but there's some points you have to be careful about with that, and some downfalls in terms of like it being really stinky or it, polluting different streams or waterways.
It's interesting to look at what PA Flax Project is doing with tank retting.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very dry there. So dew retting isn't an option. And they tank ret on a small scale and they empty the tanks midway through so it can, when it's still useful as a compost tea, and then refill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it can be really and you can adapt this process to really any region. I can't think of a region where growing flax would be impossible in the United States. I mean, if they're growing it as far as North Dakota, like you should be able to adapt your region to growing this. It just grows really well in Pennsylvania and historically has grown here. Very important not to over-ret the fiber, because if the microorganisms have decomposed the pectins too much, your fiber will just disintegrate and then it's impossible to work. So there's a lot of finesse here and expertise where, I mean, Heidi was self-taught and I feel like we were like an expert retting consultant right off the bat.
Natural flax berry. I think if you work with fiber, it makes sense. When you see it properly retted, the strength of it makes sense and the texture of it makes sense. So for me, that it felt intuitive. It was the pandemic, so I learned on a YouTube video. And then I reached out to people at Rust Belt Fibershed outside of Cleveland who have a flax project as well, and talked to them over the phone and was like, what's it supposed to sound like? And it's like, it makes this little sound and then you wind the stem around your finger and you can see the woody core break away and the fiber remains. And it's just pretty magical. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool when it works out. And so Heidi and myself, we've only really, and I'm assuming all of you, unless you've gone to France or Ireland or anything, have seen and experienced hand processing. But if you are growing to scale, which eventually that's in our scope and timeline for the Pennsylvania Flax Project, after it's properly retted, it can then be baled. Sorry, that was my dogs. It can be baled and sent to the Scotch mill, which is the next phase of the processing. We can move to the next slide. Great. So this is just an outline of all the steps from before seeding to a finished textile. And we've gone over, you want to prepare your soil bed, seeding it, monitoring the growth, making sure, everything's going well, the crop isn't flagging too much from wind or anything, which just means it's being bent over, which compromises integrity of long line.
Also known as lodging.
Lodging. Yeah. Flagging is my other farming term. And then harvest, retting, and then the remaining steps are rippling, which is removing the seed heads from the plant. And this is important if you're storing it for rodents, which we discovered through experience, because rodents really love those seeds. They're very...
We did not ripple.
Yeah, we did not ripple.
I have something to say. We ripple before we ret, because then we can use the seeds.
Right.
And also when you still have the seed pods on there, they get all tangled up and you can't bunch them differently. And it's just better to get rid of the seed pods and then you can use them again. And I wouldn't put the seed pods in the retting tank. I think it would ruin them if you wanted to use them.
Yeah.
Right. We weren't using them because we were harvesting before the seeds were ripe. So, right. So we were just we were pulling and laying it directly back down to ret.
But I
then-
think you could still ripple beforehand,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you could.
but on the
eat-
larger scale, I don't know, maybe that's not easy to do.
On a huge scale, these flax harvesters, so once you, we really should add this as a part of this, a video of the flax harvester. On a very large scale, these flax harvesters are designed, they pull the flax and it goes up and over and a conveyor belt lays it back down immediately to red. So, and they go like 40 miles an hour. It's like crazy to watch those machines. So that's sort of the model at the industrial scale, or the like large acreage. Well, I don't know what large is, but anyway. But yeah, I mean, either way is definitely doable. And I'm sure like if you're growing both for fiber and saving seed, you would definitely want to ripple before you ret, because you don't leave your seed just out on the ground. You're right about that.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
you could save just as much seed as you need.
Yeah.
And then,
Mhm.
because you don't need all of it.
Yeah. And then some of you before this meeting started, we talked about breaking. So you'll, from the breaking process, that's just further separating the stalk from the fiber, and you'll get shive as a byproduct, which there is a market for. You can use as animal bedding or insulation with building, or there's a lot of different byproduct uses for the shive. And something we're looking into when we scale this project as well. And then you have scutching, which is where the mill comes in. We'll talk a little more about that, but that process is just a further refining the fiber and separating all the shive from it. And Heidi, feel free to jump in at any point if I'm
I was
missing.
just gonna say the interesting thing, like, so it's called a sketch mill, but the sketch mill does the breaking and the sketching and the heckling.
Mhm.
So, and breaking and sketching at the mechanical level, the mill kind of does. And so, yeah, it's very streamlined into sort of a single process. So,
Yeah, while it collects that byproduct as well. And seeing a mill in operation is fascinating when you've done the hand processing, and then you're like, oh wow, this is all done at one time. It's amazing. This is what machines can do.
yeah, faster.
Yeah. And then there's hackling, which some of you may have tried as well. Heidi and I, we have just like basically a bed of nails standing upright where we pull the fiber through, and it combs it and makes it finer and ready for spinning. And tow is the byproduct of hackling. So you get this really fine byproduct, which can be used in like paper making or short line added to.
Right, tow is interesting. It can be, so paper making traditionally, it can be spun. So it's just a shorter flax fiber that can be spun. People have played around with blending it. I was talking earlier about I've carded it in with wool and spun it that way.
You went on mute.
But there's also a lot of people now working to use it to make a non-woven fabrics like horticultural cloth and the sort of thing you see for bank stabilization in construction, which would be a great use for it because it's a naturally biodegradable product to use in that way instead of polyester filament.
Mhm. There's a comment from Ellen Hawk that says, I think tow can be used for stuffing and cushions. I'm sure it's really like fluffy and nice. And that would be a great way to use it. Yeah. And
I
then
read
there's
that they used to use it to stuff their buggy seats.
Oh
Nice.
yeah.
Some of it's very coarse, but the finer stuff you can spin.
I think some
Right.
of it could almost,
Or make,
some of it
Go
could be
ahead.
a lot like horsehair stuffing. But,
Right. I think too, like, so there's the toe that is considered scutched toe, which comes from that step, still might have a lot of the woody core in it. And then the heckled toe, heckled, hetcheled. There are a lot of words for that step. And, but that toe is finer because it's been combed once. So probably the heckled toe is what you would want to spin with. And
Yeah.
a sketched toe would would be much coarser.
I have 4 hackles, and the one is very, very wide,
Hmm.
widely spaced, and that one is very coarse, and I don't use as much of it. But the last 2 are more usable,
Yeah.
medium and fine.
So that's the process. And then Heidi and I were just going to talk a little bit about what we're focusing on. The Pennsylvania Flax Project is focusing on this year and where we aim to go. The project has, from 2020, when we just spread some seed from Heidi's linen aprons onto the soil, it's exploded. And there's a lot of people now involved. And we're just really excited to see this very necessary industry returning to our country, because it was once here, and it's alive and well in other parts of the world. So we're really trying to bring it back. So one element of that are this year, and Heidi, you can talk more about this, our square yard project and small scale seed trials.
Yes, so the Square Yard project is gotten huge. It's an inclusive seed trial, also a community art and education project, and a celebration of flax for linen in Pennsylvania, and now pretty far beyond. So we're full up with people in our Square Yard project, but I was thinking for you guys, if you want to, even next season, think about doing something similar. It's a really great way to sort of see how flax performs in any given fiber shed, because it asks for a fairly small commitment from people to grow literally 36 inches square of flax. And we created a centralized database where people will be entering information about their crop, so that we can have that information about how a particular seed variety performs in microclimates in our region. And basically for the art component of it, we're asking that people keep and share a visual record of the process through photographs, because one of our plans is to do a sort of photographic quilt of the process. And then another one is that once things are harvested, to organize some hand processing events and making actual physical pieces that are woven, whether that means we're just weaving plant material, or maybe some people have spun it into the yarn, or maybe some people have made paper, whatever it is, to make some sort of physical quilt representing the work we've done together as well. We chose the measure of a square yard for the poetry of planting a square yard of flax that is a common measurement of fabric, and also just because it is so accessible. And it's just a way for us to connect our community of growers. It's super exciting. I think, I don't know, at last count, what do we have, like 60 people or something? I kind of feel like my head's exploding. It's a lot. but we're really excited to have everybody doing this, and to create a visual and physical record of our work together. And Emma and I will be meeting, I think tomorrow, with John Ennis of Journey and Design, and what's the other thing, Emma?
We just had it. It was, let's see.
We did just have it.
Yeah.
I can only remember one of the 2 organizations he's with. Anyway,
I'll find it. Yeah.
he's in Scotland, and they're doing a square meter project. And so we're actually in conversation about how to like make this an international collaboration in terms of presenting together about the projects, and maybe like the quilt being pretty huge, right? And he's actually planning to come to Philadelphia this year, so we'll get to meet him. I'm super excited about that. So it is an international movement. What is it, Emma?
It's called Our Linen Stories.
Our Linen Stories. So that's pretty cool. And then a little, just really like for us, the Pennsylvania Flax Project at its heart is really about reclaiming our textile agriculture, and recentering textile production back onto diversified farms. So this project went from let's plant an eighth of an acre of flax for linen and see what happens to like, let's get sustainable textile production back in the United States of America, and let's do it with flax, and let's do it in Pennsylvania. And, you know, let's move away from big oil and spun polymers and get back to something that we actually can all live with. And we are, you know, we're working with consultants, and we're on a 5-year plan to increase productivity on existing farms here, to create jobs for farmers and millers and spinners and weavers, and to meet the growing demand for natural fibers across several industries. And we're looking, probably our first major step, or the the last step in our 5-year plan, right, would be to get a mechanical sketch mill operational at a regional size in Pennsylvania, and have sketched fiber that would be available basically on the world market, since we don't have wet spinners in North America right now. We have a hope that somebody in that 5-year period of time will step up and want to start a wet spin facility, because there are a lot of people working toward growing flax and getting sketch mills operational. Fiber Revolution out in Oregon is there are consultants, and they're on the same path. And we're working together with each other to try to make that happen. It is not an impossibility. It gets close and then a little far away, but it seems to be something that we're on track to do. And we're not looking to corner the North American market of flax at all. We're very much looking to develop a regional mill that will function in Pennsylvania, and to help other people in other regions of the country do the same, so that there can be an interconnected network of regional flax production across the country. So
And
it's
it's
good.
go on, sorry.
That's good.
It's really just an issue of capital. Like, we say that over and over again. The customers are there, the interest is there, the farmers are there, the location for the mill is potentially there. It's really just that we need $20 million.
A lot of money, because the industry does exist, and it exists at a good scale all over Europe. Well, not all over Europe, in northern France, Belgium.
Yeah.
But like, for instance, Scotland is trying to revitalize their industry right now as well, right? So yeah, anyway, we're gonna do it.
We're going to do it. And it's especially pressing now, the state of the world, and with Ukraine and Russia. And we're seeing with climate change too, there's a huge demand for expanded growth of flax for fiber and different fiber crops. So the United States is going to have to get on board and join the global market, because we have some really incredible, rich agricultural land. And it's time to stop depending on oil and start seeing fiber as a crop again. So we're trying to make that happen.
We're so excited that you are. It's big. I think, as you put it so well, there's a lot of interest. It's getting it to scale, and it's getting mills back in this area, which have been long gone. You have a few questions in the chat room. One question is, what is a typical yield from an acre of planted flax?
This is the number one question we get.
Although we've gotten closer to answering it.
We have gotten closer to answering it. And I'm really excited for the Square Yard project, because it'll give us a diverse database of what people are harvesting off their square yard. And we're hoping we can extrapolate that information in terms of yardage per, or yield per acre. So that's one goal of the Square Yard project. We're also in conversation with consultants who their answers always are, it depends.
Yeah. How helpful.
Yeah, but
we did sort of, didn't we come after that last conversation that we had when we were talking about trying to repeat 2 tons annually of quality fiber 2 years in a row. Didn't we come to like, we thought that would be an acre?
You're right. Yeah, there was a little more
So
specifics.
we're
Yeah.
maybe at like, oh, maybe 1 or 2 acres might yield 2 tons of sketched fiber.
Mhm.
Maybe, don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm trying to see what else is in the chat room.
There's some, I want to talk to the similarity between hemp with hemp. Because I see that comes up, and do you see a promising future for the alliance of these two plants? So, I mean, this is so interesting because there are a lot of similarities with hemp. The processing is actually pretty much exactly the same, except that the last person that we talked to about this using said that hemp is broken or decorticated before it's retted, which I had never heard before. But this was an industry that processes hemp. So I thought that was interesting. The equipment is not directly, you can't process flax and hemp on exactly the same machines, is the short answer. So there is a lot of intersection, but it's not a direct correlation. And that is something we're sort of exploring. One of the growers that is experimenting with us this year grows hemp, and he's actually he's interested in growing shorter varieties of hemp, because then you could start to process it more similarly on more similar equipment. So we shall see. If there's some great innovation in that area, it'd be great, because the crops are both really valuable. The cottonizing it question is interesting too. So Janelle says modern flax processing involves chopping the flax into short pieces and cottonizing. So so there is a process of chopping the flax into short pieces and cottonizing it, and that's so it can be spun in a dry spin facility, which is the only spin facility that exists in the United States. The mill that we're talking about, the equipment we're talking about, does not do that. We're talking about, our focus is the production of long line fiber for linen, for fine linen. And that doesn't exist in North America. We also don't have wet spinners here, which is why it gets cottonized. And this is why hemp also gets cottonized. Hemp gets cut up into little tiny pieces and cottonized so it can be spun in a dry spin facility, because all our spin facilities are for cotton and wool. So we would be producing a raw material from field to spinnable fiber that would then be exported to spin, unless somebody built a wet spin facility here. I'll just put that out there in case anyone's interested. Another multi-million-dollar project.
Be interesting if we could ever find investors for such mills.
We're working on it.
Mhm. Related to that, there's one more question. Has the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture or Land Grant Ag Research universities, etc., provided resources or help with funding? So yeah, that's our kind of our the stage we're at right now in the project. Entering year 3 of research and development is now seeking funding. Once we're developing our business plan, and we're developing our brand, and kind of having something to show potential departments and funders. So that's definitely something that we're starting to focus on more, that we're getting this project up and rolling. But we're open to any and all tips.
We are, yeah, we're developing relationships at the Department of Agriculture, and we're developing our investment strategy and our pitch deck. So that's where we are. That's the not as fun part, but the super important part.
Yeah.
Southwest Virginia, where there's an effort in Southwest Virginia starting this process. Is there benefit in coordinating different efforts? Yes, absolutely. That's why we're working with Fiber Revolution out in Oregon. The more coordination, the better. You know, the dream is that we all push each other over the top, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be interested in knowing who that is in Southwest Virginia. There's also people like, so there's Rust Belt Fibershed has a Flax project, Chico Flax has a Flax project, Fiber Revolution. The more people we know about, the better.
Great. Does anyone else, and people can unmute if anyone has questions or anything else they want to ask, they should. This is such a great conversation. I've learned a lot and realize how much I still need to know.
I did have a question.
Mhm.
Have you been in touch with or know of the folks in Nova Scotia that have been growing flax, the taproot?
Taproot Fiber Lab.
Yeah, exactly. I was
Yeah.
sorry if
we've
it's
heard
really
of them.
noisy in the background here, but I I was treated to a surprise birthday present and taken up to Nova Scotia to visit this flax farm because I was interested in flax. And I did a little visit to their processing place, and they had just begun work on re-engineering a mini mill, a Belfast mini mill to process. And I just did a quick search, and it looks like they've gone to the next level, like they're now selling equipment. And I just wonder, because that sum of $20 million sounds huge, and I just wonder if I don't know, but is that mill equipment that they are producing, is that just too small scale and you're thinking larger scale? Just curious.
So that's really interesting because Angela and Shannon at Fiber Revolution, the last time I talked to Angela, she said that Taproot had gone to the next step and that she was taking a second look there, which this is a good reminder that we should take a second look there as well. Because initially that equipment was just much smaller than what we were after, but it also doesn't mean it's not a great intermediate step, and if they've taken it to the next step, maybe they've scaled it a little bit more. And it's such a dream of mine to go visit them, so I'm kind of jealous.
It's beautiful. I mean, I know, like you said, as soon as you see a flax field, you kind of fall in love. And I happened to be there when it was blooming. And I mean, miles of flax blooming is quite beautiful. And I had one other question, if it's all right I don't want to monopolize, but I was curious about the idea of using like the waste, linen processing waste, I guess, to create agricultural cloth. Is that something that you mentioned? And are people already doing that, or is that just a dream?
No, there's a woman whose name I'm not going to remember right now. I can see her face. At the University of Delaware, it's something that she's doing research on. So it is like, I mean, because it's also byproducts from both hemp and flax can be used that way. And there's a lot of research about hemp byproducts going on in Pennsylvania right now. That hemp for fiber is sort of hit a dead end of sorts, or a cul-de-sac maybe. And but the byproducts portion of that research is going gangbusters. So that's connected as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I think I read in one of the history articles that one of the reasons that linen lost the popularity contest against cotton is that it's difficult to dye and to have prints printed on. Would like dyeing linen will be like part of your project down the road, or are you keep thinking about keeping that beautiful gold shade?
Oh, we dyed some. I've had some really positive experiences with dyed linen. I haven't dyed it myself. Emma did the indigo dye, but also Beth McTeer, who used to have Honest Alchemy, dyed for me with madder root and what gets purple? It's like logwood, maybe.
Oh,
And she did several natural dyes that came out beautifully on a natural linen. So
yeah, the indigo set really beautifully on it. It's the same. It's a cell, like a plant fiber. So there's a different way of doing it than if you're dyeing an animal like a wool or anything with the indigo at least, but soaked it right up. It was gorgeous. Yeah.
I think cotton they could just do on a larger scale and it could be mechanized more easily than linen. And it just became easier to get.
well, cotton has a, do we call this an advantage? Or the competitive advantage of cotton in the United States is that it was subsidized by slave labor. So it was cheaper to produce. And then the advent of the cotton gin and the being able to like de-seed it so quickly accelerated that. So that's a whole like political issue, but it's interesting to know. And then I think for printing textiles, cotton would be easier just because it tends to be, it's easier to make a smooth cotton, and printing requires if you want a very consistent print the way we like them, that the smooth fabric is better, and making fine linen smooth is more difficult. You need a finer linen, it's harder to grow, it has to be finished differently. But the mill that I just produced a very large amount of tabletop linens, and if you stay tuned to Kitchen Garden Textiles, you'll soon know why. I'm not allowed to announce it yet, but it's pretty exciting. And it was part of my push to scale my business and to support weavers who still exist in Pennsylvania, to try to get them weaving bast fibers here in Pennsylvania as we try to grow the flax so that we can actually close all the gaps on this supply chain. And the weavers I worked with wove hemp and linen blends fabric in Bedford, Pennsylvania. All imported yarns, of course, but both plant fibers I hope will be produced in Pennsylvania soon. And they dye their stock, so they're planning to continue the project and experiment with dyeing these bast fibers here. So that's definitely in the works. So the fabric they produced is incredible. I can't wait for it to be out in the world. It's very, very pretty, very pretty.
For people interested in learning more about flax and flax production, do you have resources you recommend, or books or anything of that nature?
Where's this book? There's a book called, oh wait, this book is like the Bible, From Flax Seed to Woven Cloth. And it's by Linda Heinrich. I can pop it in the chat. And it really talks about the history of linen and the production. So it's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Thank you.
What other resources, Emma?
You, of course, you can know everyone's going to come knock on your door. If that's all right.
We'll put our
Okay.
email in the chat if you want to follow up with any questions. And then Fiber Evolution in Oregon is an amazing resource organization. They sell flaxseed that they've developed at their farm, organic and non-certified organic. They're just really great people who are like 8 years into this process too. So there's a lot of rich information there.
And the historical information, Landis Valley Farm and Museum, where the Natalie seed variety comes from, they have a beautiful little museum there with some incredible collection of processing equipment, antique processing equipment, and a lot of knowledge. Joe has been growing, what did he say, for 2 decades, I think. So he knows a lot about growing flax and he knows a lot about processing it. And he's a good resource.
So I have a question. When you all talk about growing to scale, what do you believe is the scale you need to, or what's the dream?
10,000 acres. 10,000 acres is the dream.
Okay.
Yeah.
That,
There
you
wa-
know,
There was a number of how much would be enough acreage to feed a Scotch mill. I don't remember the exact number, but our dream is to have kind of mirror the model in Europe and have a cooperative of farms that all feed into a Scotch mill. And that cooperative is owned by the growers. So I need to find that number again. I don't know, Heidi, if you remember it, but we're hoping for many large scale flax operations to exist.
lots of growers, and what, it's gonna take a lot. It takes a lot of growers for one mill, but like Pennsylvania has a lot of agricultural land, and because this is basically a rotational crop, that's really exciting. And it's also, has the potential, if once the economics of it are sorted and come out favorably for the farmers, then it becomes a cash crop that can replace things like subsidized corn and soy and heavy pesticide use GMO crops. And that's the dream. I mean, that it's like, whatever, you may as well dream big if you're gonna
Yeah,
work 40 hours a week for free to make it happen, right?
exactly.
so we're dreaming big. We're like, whatever, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting to see, like, you guys, everybody should get off this call and check out Fiber Revolution's website, because they just put 5 acres into production this year. They liberated a harvester from a museum. So they're not going to have to pull that whole 5 acres by hand. And it's just really exciting to see, there are a lot of really.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Would you possibly produce some flax for hand spinners?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. I mean, our vision for this project is that the project will always have a handworking and educational component. Like that, I think even if the industry were to get established and sort of be the norm that we produce flax for linen in Pennsylvania, you still want to be connecting that to handwork and the reality of what it takes to pull a yard of cloth from the earth, so that people can maintain an understanding of the value of what you're doing on a human scale. So I think that, I envision that the project itself would produce a really small, curated collection of goods, some of which are hand processed and some of which are done on the mill, so that you can compare the two and that people can learn and participate in that way as well. It's not a goal to create the same problem we're trying to solve, right? Like, the problem we're trying to solve is that we're disconnected from where our material goods come from. And so you don't solve that problem by creating something that is going to disconnect us from where our material goods come from. We need to integrate it into the production, I think.
It would encourage hand spinning of flax if there was a source of good fine strix for people to, which is hard to find now.
Yeah.
The wool gatherers, I just noticed they're getting theirs from Egypt.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, we have a lot of flax right now that needs to be processed. Maybe we should start doing that. Yeah.
Right.
I wonder what the quality of the fiber is from Egypt.
No, I think if you had the energy to produce some amount of strix, it would be an interesting way to generate more interest in your project amongst the hand spinning community, because it is a challenge turning. And there's the folks up in the anthracite region, the Hermitage.
Oh yeah.
But they're importing, unless you want to buy hackled, unbroken plants, they're importing Belgian flax. You can get it from them. And I say I know there's a fair bit produced in Egypt. I don't know anything about the quality.
Yeah, I don't either.
Thanks, that's, I wrote that down. Strix for
Yeah,
hand
I think if, you know, there's not a, you know, I don't know how large the hand spinning community is. I get both spin-off and ply magazines, and those are places you could, you know, put out some sort of an announcement or an inquiry perhaps, and see what kind of interest there is. But I think that a reliable source of good quality Strix would perhaps be interesting. I mean, hand spinning flax is a bit of a pain in the ass unless you learn how and learn some tricks and so forth. I'm just beginning to understand some of it, but
It's very slow.
yeah, it's very slow because you tend to spin a much finer thread than you do with wool. And it goes slowly, at least as you're learning. And it takes a fair bit of space to set up, and you've got to have a dish of water and it splashes, and you know, it's not as much fun and ease as learning to spin wool, which, I mean, doesn't take a whole lot to make a usable yarn. A usable linen thread is a little more of a challenge. It's doable, learnable, but it's not going to be the thing that immediate hand spinners are going to pick up. You're looking for a fairly dedicated group, but there may be ways to explore whether that group is out there.
I see that Claudia has a question.
Yes, I'm curious about your thought or on how the climate crisis is affecting your business and your project in the future. How, because of the water issue?
Do you have thoughts on that, Emma?
Have you thought about that, or
Did you say because of the water issue? Sorry.
yes, I mean, if you don't want to use for the processing, for readying the chemicals, then you need water. And do you see a problem in that in the future, that you may run out of enough water to actually process the flax?
Other than the redding, I don't know too much. I mean, we've been basing the business on do redding, so not using the tank method. Heidi, is there any other big water usage in the process then?
The spinning is where water usage
Okay.
occurs. But in terms of processing from field to spinnable fiber, that's why we are basing the business on do redding as opposed to tank redding. So far in this climate, I mean, we're sort of having the opposite issue with water. Like this year, we had last year, I'm sorry, we had significant crop loss because of the hurricane. We had too much water. So it got really messy. Like we had 5 inches of rain.
Yeah, our climate's kind of becoming like a temperate, like rainforest climate more than a California drought. Yeah.
I can speak to that with some professional authority. I think Pennsylvania is not anticipating substantial drought. Some parts of the United States certainly are, but Pennsylvania, I think things could change. It's called climate change for a reason, but from what we've seen so far, we're looking at more extremes, hence the kinds of flooding and things we've had. But I don't see, and unless the industrial process of wet spinning is quite different than I can imagine, I don't think enough water for that is going to be a big problem.
Right.
Hand spinning is dipping your fingers in a bowl of water every few minutes, and that's really not a huge consumptive use.
It's an interesting question. Something else to research.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of climate change and extremes, we see the project as a, what's the word I'm looking for, Heidi? Like an alternative to
Solution?
Solution. Exactly. To a lot of the issues that we've been faced with in the textile industry. So we're hoping, it's terrible to say, but just as our climate gets worse and more extreme, people will begin to realize that we do really need to pivot, and this is a solution. I'm really curious how, large scale ag operations are going to operate in terms of, fuel costs and everything like that. We're experiencing that right now on our farm, a small scale farm. So we've been talking to large scale growers who do no-till, and different, alternatives to, fighting climate disaster. But,
Right. And the hope is that with more regional scale operations that are geared toward carbon sequestration, that if we win this, we reverse the trends, right? If we don't win it, all bets are off. So we're just pressing forward with the fact that this is a way to produce textiles that can in fact be part of a regenerative agricultural system.
I think we're all there with you and hope it goes very well. Very well.
Thank you.
Helen and I went to a workshop, and one of the things that the instructor told us was that the fashion industry is responsible for as much or more of the climate change than fuel and gas oil use.
Mm-hmm.
It's a major consumer of fossil fuels and sources of pollution. I think that's part of why all of us are here, is you read those statistics and you can't help but want to make it a better system that actually works for people and the planet.
Right. Yeah, to be able to grow a fiber with no chemical inputs, to process it with no chemicals, and to compost it when it reaches the end of its useful life is pretty much, that we need to get back to it.
Yeah.
One other point that came out of that workshop, which goes back to an earlier comment that was made in this session, was that the commercial change from flax and hemp and other bast fibers to cotton was partly a fashion concern. Cotton is a lot easier to iron and looks better and crisper. If you and at the time that change was taking place, domestic labor was didn't have electric irons and so forth and so on. So labor wearing good-looking linen was a lot more labor intensive.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like, I mean, now, they're softened or worn in, or like natural casual linen is like the look now. It's like, that's also part of the work, is to sort of to change the aesthetic, to embrace the imperfection of natural fibers. So
You use the material to highlight its strengths rather than to try to match a different fiber which has different strengths.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That rumpled look has become very popular for all of us during the pandemic. It's that and slippers.
Indeed.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, we're up on almost to an hour and a half. If anyone doesn't have any more questions, I just want to say a big thank you to both Heidi and Emma for such a terrific session. This has been so informative, and we look forward to seeing more of your project and having more time with you. It would be great.
How do we
I have one.
how do we hear more about the progress? I signed up on Heidi's website just recently, but
The Pennsylvania, so I'll pop it in the chat. The Pennsylvania Flower Project has its own website as well. But I will tell you, one day we will get on a regular schedule of sending out updates. That hasn't happened yet, but it'll happen. So
I have a
Go ahead.
I have a question when you're ready.
Oh, you can go ahead. Yeah.
I've read that several people have said that you need to rotate the flax either every year or go 7 years in between or whatever, several years in between planting it on the same land. And I was wondering if you knew exactly why that is and what is it losing, and does anything shorten that time that you could do to the soil so that you can plant it again on
I'd
the
like
same
to-
place.
Yeah, we've heard different varying information on that as well. I heard the 7-year from some resource that said it was it was a heavy feeder, like it pulled a lot of nutrients out of the ground. And I have a hard time believing that just on how it grew and how low of a feeder it was. I think the main issue is disease. So especially like in Europe and here as well, fusarium wilt is a big issue. And once you get it in your soil, it's a soil-borne disease and it's really hard to get rid of. So I could see rotating every 7 years just to ensure that your next crop isn't getting it. But other than that, I think as long as you're, tending the soil in a way where you're not totally depleting it and you don't see fusarium wilt, or you never had that on your ground, then it's just observing if there's any, harbor disease or there's no real pests that we've noticed. So yeah, I think it's just keeping an eye on it and seeing if something begins to be a problem,
If
then
it's taking
rotate it.
taking nutrients out, maybe you can fertilize more. I planted mine two years on the same plot, and then this year I decided, instead of going a third year, moving it to the next one to it. And I just don't know exactly what it is that it's doing to the soil and what can be
Soil
done
tests are a
to-
great way to gauge that. You can do a soil test before and after. If you're harvesting something and pulling it out of the ground and not putting anything back in, you're depleting the soil. So we plant cover crops in between. I just add amendments to my entire field anyways as a good preventative building of soil. But yeah, with any crop, I mean, if you're just continually growing it and then benefiting from the fruits of the labor and not going back, you're going to deplete it.
Yeah, I'm planning to grow herbs and vegetables in between times.
Yeah, and I would put compost down and fertilize, because vegetables and herbs definitely need, nutrients. Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys.
Thank
I
you
hope-
so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We learned some stuff too, and that's always like what's so cool about this.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a great journey to go on together.
All right.
Thank you all. Thanks everyone for attending today, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording.